Good morning and welcome to The Appeal Live, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Emily Galvin-Almanza. So earlier this month, lawmakers in Maryland approved new legislation to provide low-income tenants with access to legal representation in eviction cases. That bill, HB 18, is now sitting on Maryland Governor Larry Hogan's desk, where he has until the end of May to sign it, veto it, or allow it to become law without his signature. HB 18 would offer a serious lifeline to Maryland renters who've fallen behind on rent due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic fallout from that. Now, recent estimates suggest that as many as 204,000 renter households in Maryland are currently at risk of eviction. We're talking individual renters, but we're also talking families who are just trying to keep a roof over their heads. Now, for the time being, many of these tenants qualify for protection under state or federal eviction moratoriums that are scheduled to be in effect until the end of June. But when these measures expire, the eviction machine will kick up into full gear, and many of the people who've been treading water will be at immediate risk of losing their housing and possibly being removed by sheriff's deputies. Now, under the current system, that risk is made much, much worse by the fact that the overwhelming majority of people who are in this situation can't afford a lawyer. They would have to go through an eviction process with no lawyer to fight for them or give them advice. But their landlord would almost certainly have a lawyer because most landlords in housing court do have lawyers. A recent study of evictions in Baltimore, for example, found that 1% of tenants had lawyers during evictions, compared with, you want to take a guess? 96% of landlords. So with no lawyer up against somebody who does have a lawyer, renters usually get run over during eviction proceedings. Tenants without counsel are far more likely to lose their homes. They're more likely to be forced out in evictions carried out by sheriff's deputies. They're less likely to be able to negotiate move-out dates or keep an eviction off their record in a way that would help them find housing again in the future. They are much less likely to get access to rental or relocation assistance, and they're also less likely to be able to apply for public housing. This is a recipe for leaving families unhoused. This damages the ability of every one of those 99% of renters who didn't have lawyers in an eviction proceeding to find housing again in the future. Now, HB 18 would seek to level that playing field by providing certain renters with an attorney to represent them during the eviction process. If Governor Hogan signs HB 18 or otherwise allows it to go into effect, Maryland would also make history as the first state to provide renters with this sort of access to legal counsel. Now, joining me now to discuss HB 18 is the bill's chief sponsor, Maryland Delegate Wanika Fisher. Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me, Emily. It's an honor to be here with you.
So before we talk about HB 18, I'm wondering if you can kind of fill us in on how we got here, like the scope of the looming eviction crisis in Maryland, what the eviction landscape looks like right now for tenants. And also, I mean, I mentioned that over 200,000 families are at risk of eviction. How are they currently protected? And are they looking at a landscape that's about to get a lot worse?
Yeah, they definitely are. You know, Maryland, just like many states in our country, have been deeply impacted by the COVID-19 crisis, and many renters have as well. So especially in my district in Prince George's County, I represent a huge rental population and a transient one at that. And so if you are looking at what's going on right now, people are covered in our state of emergency order. The orders that Governor Hogan has enacted allows you to have protection from eviction. But as soon as those orders are lifted, as you stated in your introduction, a lot of the families in my district and throughout our state are going to be pushed out of their homes. And it's not even just a financial issue. It will continue to be a public health and a public safety issues. Our homeless population already has a lot of health issues, has been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and other factors. So right now, housing and renters are just getting by. There's protection through our government, whether it's a local government in your county or on the state level. But as our economy turns, as we're making progress with the COVID-19 pandemic, all of these protections are going to be literally like a rug pulled out from under folks, and they're going to have to be there on their own. And so a lot of advocates in the housing and landlord community approached me and approached my crossfile on this bill, Senator Hellman, and Delegate Sandy Rosenberg, who's been working on a right to counsel like issues for years in our state house to do this legislation. And so before session started, we decided to take the pilot that was going on in Baltimore, but apply it on a state level.
So I'm just thinking about this practically. People don't want to see their neighbors rendered unhoused. Nobody living in a community wants the homeless community to be increased. We want more people to be safely housed. Judges don't want to have the chaos of like frightened, unrepresented people in their courtroom with no idea what to do. Judges want to get better information that usually comes from lawyers. Businesses want to have their employees able to come to work after having had a shower in their own home or had a meal in their own home. And according to polling from Data for Progress in the appeal, 73% of Maryland voters support this right to counsel for renters. So I guess what I'm asking is, does Governor Hogan know how popular this is? And also, who is opposing this? Like, who benefits from the status quo?
Right. I think, I will say that I'll just put Governor Hogan first. One, I can never tell I'm not one who's going to say what's in his mind sometimes. What I am hoping is Marylanders are in there. And if Marylanders is in his minds and hearts, he will sign this legislation or allow it to be enacted. It has been my speaker, Speaker Adrian Jones, our first Black female speaker ever in Maryland, and President Bill Ferguson that have led and have been fighting for Marylanders in this COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm hoping that this legislation, not only the popularity with Maryland voters, but the fact that we care about Maryland families and children, and we want to make sure that people have a fair shot. A lot of people don't know they have defenses. There are landlords that are really slumlords that haven't upgraded a toilet or done anything for your leaky roof in months, and you have defenses. But you don't know those defenses if you don't know the law. And as an attorney myself, I wouldn't want to be in court unrepresented, and I am a lawyer. So, it's just an unfair imbalance of representation. And then I would say to the second part of your question, what can you remind me of that again? You said what was in Hogan's thoughts, and was the second part?
But I mean, I'm just wondering, you mentioned landlords who don't want to fix leaky toilets.
Oh, yes, the opposition to this legislation.
Yeah,
a lot of landlords actually did not oppose the legislation. They didn't want to pay for it. So there were two parts of this bill. There is the right to counsel that passed, which is HB 18, and then Maryland actually has the lowest legal fee to put when it comes to starting an eviction paperwork. It's $15. We are one of the lowest in the entire country. And so there was a bill to increase the fee to around 85 to have parity with other states and our locals, but that bill didn't make it on the fine die. So it's something that we'll be addressing. So the way this bill right now, right to counsel will be covered by a lot of the federal money that's addressing eviction and housing crises and other streams of income throughout the budget. So they're actually, I think that landlords kind of knew there was a coming to Jesus moment, honestly, when it came to what's going on in our society around housing. So they did have technical opposition, but not an outright opposition to a right to counsel. They just didn't want to pay for a right to counsel. So it was a very interesting debate throughout the legislative session.
I'm sort of wondering, though, thinking tactically about, I'm a former public defender, so I'm going to put this in my like public defender, criminal defense mindset, like knowing how inexpensive a public defender is, and knowing how expensive homelessness is, knowing how expensive trying to shelter and provide medical care and employment access. Economic mobility. Could this bill pay for itself just in terms of the savings?
I think it does pay for itself, and it will. We projected that the state will save over $90 million in services in our projections when it comes to families staying in their home and what we pay for, social services, homelessness, different food inequity issues that come with that, all hosts of social services. So that's what in the testimony that we presented on the House side and in the Senate. That was what was projected in savings. And a lot of times, whether it's this bill or any other bill, we always talk about what's it going to cost, but we don't look at the long-term savings of people being independent, being self-efficient. And the thing is, most people, want to pay their rent. Most people want to feel comfortable in where they live and feel responsible. But when you're hit with a international pandemic, mixed with the fact that most Marylanders need 2 paychecks to cover the rent. So if rent's due on the first, you usually don't get your second paycheck till about 10 days later to make how much it is in our market here in the Maryland, DC area. And so people are being put in eviction proceedings when really they're just late. And so what's also great in this bill is that there's a 10-day notice notification that was not there before, because a lot of renters that you'll see, and I encourage anyone, I go to court all the time, just sit at a docket in district court, and it is just like churning out notices, and half of them sometimes get thrown out because landlords, because it is so cheap to file, they file just because someone's 2 or 3 days late because they need the 2 paychecks to pay. And our court system, we also have to think about a judicial economy. Our court system isn't here to be your private collection agency. Our court system is paid by the residents of Maryland for justice and for equity and for equality. And so obviously, there are landlords, small landlords that have been hard hit. Don't let me get that wrong. There are small landlords who haven't seen any additional revenue during this time. But a lot of the direct payments from the county and the state and the federal government are going directly to landlords. It's actually not, the money isn't going for all the rental assistance programs. It's not actually going to the tenant. It's going directly to the landlord to make up for that time. So we're hoping we can make landlords whole. But we also need to look at the bigger public crisis. And a lot of the bigger landlords that own huge apartment complexes and the like, they're paying for counsel or representation to go to court on a monthly and a weekly basis to just churn out eviction proceedings when people are a day late on rent.
That seems, just knowing how much like the salary of a court clerk is who has to churn out all those papers, the serving of those papers, that's a massive, massive expenditure. Turning for a second just to the outcome side, I know that in localities that have imposed a right to counsel, looking at, for example, Cleveland, 93% of evictions were prevented during the first 6 months of their right to counsel program. And there were similar results in New York and San Francisco. And I'm wondering what metrics you will be looking at to determine whether this bill is a success, should it go into effect.
I think we're going to be looking at a lot of things. I think we're going to be looking at how many evictions were either mitigated or stopped completely. We're going to be looking at the amount of families served. I think we're going to also be looking at the amount of evictions that are filed. I will say this, when the tenant is going to have counsel, you might, instead of filing the eviction, you might just email your tenant and say, hey, are you going to be late, or are you going to be on time with the rent? And, landlords already can charge up to 5% of a late fee. So instead of, I think you're going to see, I'm going to look at it as a win when you actually see eviction proceedings going down. And it's not because people think we're overtaking the landlords. It's about having that human interaction and just that understanding that someone might be late on their rent, and you might not always need the court system. Our committee, our House Judiciary Committee, is a hardworking committee in Annapolis, and we hear a lot of issues. Everything. And sometimes I always tell people, not every societal ill can be fixed in the courtroom. It's just not always, it's not always the answer. And so sometimes talking to someone is the answer. And I think, when I look at those things, those are the metrics that I'm going to be looking at. And, kids that are able to stay in their home and attend their same school, that's a win. So there's going to be a lot. And I think that you're going to see similar results, because having counsel, whether it's a criminal or a civil proceeding, is a huge game changer.
So speaking of game changers and metrics, I'm wondering if you could talk for a second about the degree to which this is a racial justice issue as well, because obviously, not everyone is being impacted equally by these laws. And the kids who want to stay in their same school are not, representative, I think, across the board of the racial distribution of the state. So can you talk about the impact there?
Yeah, when we looked at the numbers in Baltimore, Black women are about it goes to around 300% more likely to be evicted than a white male in Maryland, in Baltimore. And so at the end of the day, this bill is providing counsel for families of color, for Black women. And, I think that puts a face to who is really at the receiving end. Again, it was just we don't have the data for the whole state because Baltimore was our pilot. So like in my district, I have a huge immigrant, huge Latino population. So obviously, it's going to have a different outcome. I have tenants. The reason why I was so motivated for this bill, I have two really bad apartments, Victoria and Bedford apartments in Langley Park, that have been continuously covered in the Post and other publications about just the slumlord practices there and how much my Latino and immigrant families are suffering. And so knowing that they'll have an ability to have right to counsel and what's going to be going on helps me sleep better at night. And I live literally 5 minutes from them. So it's really affecting our real neighbors and folks that have been disproportionately marginalized and put in vulnerable situations. Because, what I tell people every day on this bill, and I think which is why I got a lot of support throughout the party, is there's a difference between a landlord and a slumlord. And if you are a landlord, I think it's going to be easier for you. When I was, you're a former public defender, I was a former prosecutor. I'm private now. It's easier to deal with a case when when the PD is there, or a defense attorney's there to figure out what's going on, when someone is pro se and you're just trying to explain to them their rights, you can't go forward on the case. For landlords, this is going to be a way to get solutions, because at the end of the day, a good landlord wants to provide a good product and be paid. And I understand that, and I support that 100%. But when you're a slumlord, and so you're trying to really not provide good services and get every dime you can out of a situation without investing in your property, without investing in your clients or your consumer, that's a problem. And I think that this bill is going to really distinguish in Maryland who's proper landlords, because at the end of the day, if you don't have a defense and you haven't paid your rent, you will be evicted. This bill does not say you will not be evicted. You will be evicted if you don't have a defense and you haven't been paying your rent. And as long as all your rights that you're due are followed, you will eventually be evicted, right? But if you are a slumlord, there's going to be mitigating things. Obviously, the person will be able to stay forever and ever, amen, but there's going to be mitigating factors on how the eviction occurs, if it can occur. I mean, there are people that are renting properties here in my county that don't have a rental license from the county. So if you're renting your home and someone hasn't paid you and you never went to the county to pay for a rental license, you don't have a right for an eviction proceeding.
See, now, two things strike me there. One is that I really appreciate that differentiation between landlords and slumlords. And two, I'm going to take it anytime a prosecutor tells me how valuable we public defenders are in the process.
Yeah. We couldn't do it without you guys.
Oh, so I'm just going to frame this moment and put it on my wall. Last thing before we close, is there any chance that Governor Hogan is going to veto this bill? And what would you say? You mentioned a minute ago the importance of people talking directly to each other, landlords talking directly to their tenants. What would you say to Governor Hogan in these days as he considers what to do with that pen?
I would say to him that when we get elected to these positions, me as a state representative in the legislature and him as governor, that people vote for us. Some people don't. But we enter the role and we put our hand on that Bible or whatever book you choose to say you're going to represent all Marylanders. I represent everyone in my district. I represent Prince George's County. He represents the whole state. And if you were surveying all Marylanders, they deserve right to counsel. And that people all deserve access to court. And as I said on my floor debate, this is an opportunity. This is not a guarantee. And so I think it's fair legislation, it's timely legislation, and that I just hope he considers Maryland families and Maryland children when he's deciding what to do with this bill. And, Maryland is a leader. We like to lead. And I think it would be great for my home state to be the first in the country, because we want to put our families first. And I think Maryland, I always say this about my own district, that I will say it about our state, is my biggest asset is our children. And so when I think about how unstable a child's life can be with everything that's going on, with illness, with over, we have 500,000 Americans are dead, everything that's been going on with COVID, to also then be healed from your house. You haven't seen your school. You haven't maybe seen your teacher in a long time. I just think about Maryland's children and how much children need stability. And especially children that are low income, which is who would be represented in this bill. You have to be qualified as low income to get this access to counsel, right to counsel. So I just would ask him to think about that. And I think if he thinks about that, he'll make the right decision to sign it, or to let it become enacted if he can't be moved to sign.
Well, Delegate Fisher, thank you so much for your work on this. Thank you for coming on the show to tell us all about what's going on. And I wish you the best of luck. I will be counting down those days to the end of May.
Thank you so much. So will we.
Take care. So there you have it. A fight to keep families housed, to keep kids able to stay in their same school, to create equity. Delegate Fisher just told us that this bill is likely to impact people in ways that are powerful, important for cost savings, and equitable. She mentioned that Black women in their initial study are over 300% more likely to be evicted than a similarly situated white male. That is a staggering figure when you think about the fallout from that to families, to kids, to communities, to employers, to colleagues. This is a bill that Maryland is considering, which would make it the first state to give people a shot to make their case in court. Delegate Fisher pointed out, it's not a guarantee. It doesn't mean that anybody's guaranteed to stay in their home, but it does mean they can put their best foot forward, and that slumlords are going to have a harder time exploiting people, that judges are going to have a better time getting information out of people who have counsel, who can put the most important information out there on the record, and that she expects this bill to pay for itself, over $90 million in savings that could be realized by the state if this bill were to pass. Landlords don't seem to be opposing it at this point. No one wants the housing crisis that is going to happen in June if no action is taken. And she had a chance to speak directly to the governor to urge him to use that pen to either sign this bill now or let it come into being at the end of May. So there you have it, one of many states that's on this track to create more housing equity and protect people from being rendered unhoused in the midst of an historic pandemic. We're very glad to be covering that here on The Appeal Live and bringing you all the important issues you need to be following. I'm Emily Galvin Almanza. Thank you so much for joining us.